Hey friends, wanted to come back and do some read aloud with you because you've been missing out on me. So I'm just going to pick up where we left off. Remember, it's the chapter. We did Thanksgiving. Now it's the holiday season. Mary Alice is at home working on homework, and Grandma comes rumbling in this big rubber suit and all sorts of stuff. And yeah, it's a dark night. And Grandma's telling Mary Alice, we're going back out. And Mary Alice is telling her, like, well, I got my homework. Come on. And Grandma's like, well, but it's a moonlit night. And she shimmied back into her chest waders and stuffed her skirt tails inside. Grandma, it's a school night. I need my sleep. Sleep? You'll sleep your life away and rot under the bed. Better pull on 2 pairs of socks under your galoshes. Yes, I'm reading the last couple paragraphs, so don't be freaked out. You read this before. Where? It's about to get to the part I haven't read. So I had galoshes and I hated wearing them. Grandma, where are we going? Oh, we're going after a character who's smarter than we are, she said, struggling into the coat and clenching her jaw. When I came back to the kitchen, layered like Admiral Byrd, Grandma was rummaging through the mysterious wicker basket. She took inventory of various things buried in the walnut hulls. There was a coil of her picture wire, remember the tripwire, a handful of wooden stakes. She drew from the small glass vials some amber liquid. With a sly look my way, she uncorked it and put it under my nose, and I reeled back. Oof, Grandma, that smells nasty. Well, depends on who's doing the smelling. She rummaged on, coming up with what looked like a rabbit's foot. It was something furry off a rabbit anyway. What's that for, Grandma? Good luck? Oh, you might say so. Then she stood to hoist the basket onto her shoulder, and she remembered and made for a drawer in the Hoosier cabinet. Out of the drawer, she drew a gun. I froze. Sorry, guys. Wait. I know I'm interrupting, but this is Charlie right here. He's sleeping. He's so cute. All right. Anyway, Grandma's now armed. Again. It was nothing like the blunderbuss shotgun behind the wood box. In fact, it was a single-shot .22 pistol, but I didn't know that then. There was a lot I didn't know, and slipping the pistol into her pocket, she marched us both out the door and into the night. We trod the icy ridges of the road, and the town fell back behind us, and a cold, cloudless moon glared on white fields. Oh, that's a nice personification. I walked in Grandma's shadow, hearing the basket thump on her back and the walnut hulls dance to her step. Of course, I should be sound asleep and in bed by now, and I couldn't feel my toes, and Grandma was packing a pistol. But it was beautiful out here, like a black and white Christmas card. And the ice and the woven wire fences was the lattice work of diamonds, also good figurative language. And only Grandma and I were awake in all this stillness. At least I hoped so. We must have walked halfway to Cowgill's farm before she nudged me off the road. We jammed a gate against a drift and entered someone's field. The snow was deeper here, and Grandma led the way as we kept to the fences of the far corner of the field. And she put up a hand to hold me back. She wore railroader's gloves, and then I heard the scream. A scream too human from down in the dipping corner of the field that the moon missed. Now, mind you, if I was in the classroom, I would have done that scream, but I have 2 children and a Mrs. McCarthy sleeping upstairs, so you're not going to get it. It'll all be just like, ah, there's your scream. An answering scream froze in my throat. Grandma shrugged out of the basket and whipped the pistol from her pocket. A moonbeam, glanced at the black metal of the narrow barrel as she aimed it into the dark corner where the 2 fences met. She fired straight into the scream. Boom. Again, louder in the classroom. My knees begged to buckle. Then she was down on all fours now, the black coat fanning out in the snow, her hands busy. She worked intently, biting off one glove to use her bare hand to do whatever she was doing. She tugged at a wire, and powdery snow shook loose off a fence post. Metal clicked, and then she pulled back and held him up by the neck. It was a fox. Red, though black in the moonlight. His head lolled against her fist, and his eyes were black beads, but he was dead, drilled through the head to put him out of his misery. A slender stem seemed to connect his hanging mouth to the snow, but that was a thin trickle of blood, and I fought to keep the supper down in my throat. Grandma dropped the fox in the snow and reached for the jawed spring trap that had caught it. A victor number 2, as I would come to know. She pulled herself to her feet to toss the trap into the basket. The walnut hulls were to disguise a human scent. So were the rubber chest waders. Oh, I had lots to learn once I was over the first shock. Replacing her glove, she plunged her whole arm into the basket and came up with another trap. She fished for the tuft of rabbit fur in the vial of amber liquid and the picture wire. Come on. Then she was down in the snow again, gasping with the work and the cold. Steam rose off her. She wired a trap to a fence post, and she stuck a little flag of rabbit fur in the workings of the trap and drew a cork from the vial with her teeth. She'd driven the wooden stake, and now she poured a little fluid on it. Ugh, Grandma, what is that stuff? Fox here, and she said, and set the jaws of the trap. Once more she dragged herself upright. We moved along the fence, and she gave me the trapping basket to carry, making me part of this. She swung the fox by his brush tail after she'd reloaded the pistol. He's smart, Grandma said, mostly to herself, but teaching me. Wily, he can smell me. I can't smell him. But there's some fox in me, and I know how he thinks. He likes fence lines and standing water and ditches, and I need the snow to track him. We came to 2 more of her traps. I guess I was relieved to see them empty. And then on across another pasture, a trap yielded a fox already dead. Though Grandma was quick on the trigger, I think she was glad of that. I was. She tied her 2 foxes together with twine from her pocket. She was never without twine. Then we followed a fresh track of prints to the edge of a frozen drainage ditch where she set another trap. How quick and sure she worked with those stiff old hands of hers. I was cold right through. We worked back to the road by a meandering route, leaving our own tracks behind. Now she had 4 foxes twined together. When she held them up, you could see how they'd be. Fox furs with glass eyes ranged around some lady's shoulders far away from here. The next day, Grandma skinned the foxes and nailed their pelts to the cowhouse wall, and when the fur broker came around, they did a deal. He tried his best, telling her he was mainly in the market for muskrat and beaver, but she was better with foxes and at driving a bargain. She sold every last skin at her price. And this began to clear up the mystery of where Grandma got such ready money as she had, because we haven't really heard about Grandma having a job, have we? But Grandma always had money if she needed it. I went out with her many a December night when the snow was on the ground. Something drew me away from the warm stove. I dreaded the scream of the trapped fox, but I'd have heard it anyway in my head at home. So I'd go out with Grandma to work the traps in the ebony and silver nights. There were little changes stirring in me. I began to notice how old Grandma was, how hard she worked herself, and how far from town she'd roam in the frozen nights across uneven ground. I began to want to be there with her, to make sure she'd come safely home. Well, at school, we practiced for the Christmas program all month long. Miss Butler couldn't sing either, but she was a feisty director. After we'd run Lo How a Rose into the ground, she took it off the program. And she wasn't satisfied with our Once in Royal David City either. She took the Christmas program personally, as teachers do. Remind me, I actually had to help coordinate a music program my very, very first year teaching. It wasn't Christmas songs, it was all sorts of Broadway show tunes. But I had to do one. Not pretty. Anyway, we had our stage props now. A radiating tinfoil star and one of those mangers you see in nativity scenes and nowhere else. Baby Jesus was a battered doll with eyes that opened and closed. It was Ina Ray's. She said she had it when she was little, but the rumor was she still played with it. I had a sheet shawl and drapings, and Carleen Lovejoy looked straight out of Hollywood in her satin gown and wings as head angel. But other people whined they weren't nearly set for the big night. In rehearsal, both Johnson boys went bone white and fainted. They had bad cases of stage fright, though they were only shepherds. Grandma naturally took no interest, even when I complained to her about Carleen Lovejoy's halo. It was all tinsel and practically lit up. Grandma was busy, but then I wouldn't have taken her for a Christmas kind of woman anyway. Still, one day after school, I found her looking over the mail-order catalogs. She handed me the one from Sears, open to Fashions and Footgear for the Junior Miss and the Younger Active Woman. Pick you out a pair, she said. Grandma, do I get a Christmas present? I said to test her. You need shoes, she said. Otherwise, you'll be binding your feet in rags to get through the winter like Valley Forge. Remember that when you do the revolution with Mrs. Anderson. I considered every pair and every page, trying them on in my mind. A lot rode on my decision. These shoes had to go everywhere I went, and there'd be room in the toes, which made my heart sing. Grandma had long grown restless when I finally made my choice. They had to be practical with a closed toe, and still being 15, I wanted something a little bit older with a Cuban heel. I knew they'd have to lace up or Grandma wouldn't go for them. So I checked off a pair, gunmetal gray to go with everything. Grandma considered my choice, and the toothpick hovered. At them, she said at last. Hoo-wee! $2.75, her eyes filled her spectacles. I remember when you could shoe a whole family and the horse for that kind of money. But then we drew paper patterns around my feet to send back for the right size. She filled out the order with the toothpick aslant in the corner of her mouth, and then she stamped the return envelope. In fact, that was the only time I ever saw her use a stamp. Later, I caught her studying the catalog from Lane Bryant. Winter and Spring of 1938 modes for the fuller figured woman, but I stole away without a word. Then the days slipped faster off the December calendar. Tension mounted at school, and both Johnson brothers were often absent. Carlene Lovejoy preened in advance, and clearly she thought her angel was going to outshine my Virgin Mary. She was going to be the Christmas program center of attention, or know the reason why. Something was coming over Grandma, too. She was jumpier than a jackrabbit, and the short days were too long for her. One evening, when it was hardly dark, she had us both out tramping the road north. We pulled an old handmade sled out of my dad's. Grandma, now where are we going? Greens, she replied. When we came upon Asbury Chapel standing out in an open country, I noticed the graveyard. It was screened in by a stand of evergreens. Grandma, I said, you wouldn't. No, she wouldn't swipe Christmas greens from a graveyard, though. I heard it cross her mind. We tramped on to the timber in the bottoms along Salt Creek, and there we found long-needled pine and blue spruce. Grandma took Augie Fluke's knife to them, and we began to stack the sled with greenery. Then, as if it was meant to be, we came upon a little fir tree. It wasn't 3 feet tall and far from full, but Grandma fell on it, and her knife gnawed away at its spindly trunk. We trudged back to town with the greens tied to the sled, and I went over the words to bring a torch, Jeanette Isabella, in my mind. Grandma was looking straight ahead. By the night of the program, I should have known something was up. Grandma had lit the stove in the front room for the first time this winter. A merry fire cracked behind isinglass windows, and she was hanging a wreath in the bay. The Christmas tree stood in the nest of cotton batting on her marble-top table. It was decorated with a string of popcorn and pine cones from the timber. On top was a tin star she'd cut out of a can. I stood soaking in the warmth of the room, pine-scented. The idea of going to the Christmas program herself had clearly not crossed Grandma's mind. She certainly wasn't dressed for it. I was. I had on my costume, bristling with pins, and under it new gunmetal shoes fresh from the box, and overall last year's plaid coat. But now it had lush cuffs of fox fur, making my sleeves long enough again. Grandma turned on me in surprise. She looked down to see I was wearing sheets. Grandma, it's the program tonight. Waving away her own forgetfulness, she said, well, then you better weigh this. And then she produced something from a big apron pocket. It looked like a coil of baling wire. She handed it over. And baling wire is the string that goes around hay bales. She handed it over. It was a coil of baling wire, and twisted in it were tiny tin stars cut from cans. A day's work to make. Grandma stood back, her hands clasped, a little eagerness in her eyes. Now, watch out them stars don't dig your scalp. Grandma made me a halo so Carlene Lovejoy and all her tinsel wouldn't outshine me. Looked a little more like a crown of thorns, but I handled it carefully. I'd have come dangerously near kissing Grandma then if she'd let me, and then I was walking through town in galoshes to save my shoes. We'd done all the rehearsing at school, but the program was to be at the United Brethren Church. Though Jesus was born in a stable, the school basement didn't seem quite right. So back in the day, a lot of these schools and such, they used to do Christmas programs. Because, these smaller communities and these places back then, it's like almost everybody, if not everybody, was celebrating that holiday. It's not like things are now where we've got all sorts of wonderful people doing all sorts of wonderful holidays. So, anywho, the church threw stained glass light out in the snow and people flocked up the front steps. As I went inside, the train from St. Louis pulled in at the Wabash Depot. The whole town became a little village under a Christmas tree with the electric train circling and the glowing cardboard houses and the steeple church sunk in cotton snow. Well, if you think one Christmas program is like another, you didn't see ours. The robing room where we girls got ready was full of bad omens. Who knew what went on across the chancel where the boys were dressing in the choir room with Mr. Herkimer? The girls who were only in the chorus flapped like bats in their choir robes, and the angels were Irene, Mona, and Gertrude. And the littlest angel was Ina Ray Gage. None of their wings matched, and Ina Ray, the smallest, had the biggest wings. Chicken wire. She could barely move in the room. It was like a bird cage in there. And then in swept Carleen Lovejoy. Her shimmering gown, cut on the bias, was meant to outdo all the other angels. Her halo hovered high above her head, supported from behind. She was made up as for the New York stage. She'd shaved off her eyebrows and drawn in new ones. Her cheeks were pinker than nature. Her lips were a deep red Cupid's bow with fingernails to match. She was a natural blonde, and that was the only natural thing about her. Miss Butler edged into the room, and Carleen very nearly blinded her. "Carleen, wipe all that stuff off your face," she said, stricter than school. "You look like you're bleeding from the mouth." Carleen bridled and stood firm. Seeing that I was in 3 hanging sheets, Miss Butler turned to secure my costume. When I reached for my coat and drew out the baling wire halo, she nearly swallowed her pins. But there was an opening night excitement even among us. From backstage, you hear the rustle of paper programs and the creak of pews, and the organ boomed, "Hark the herald angels sing," da-da-da-da-da, and so on. There was no going back. The United Brethren preacher, Reverend Lutz, rose to quiet the crowd with a passage from Luke. Miss Butler was pushing the choir girls on, and we in costume were to hang back here off stage, singing through the open door to add volume, but keeping out of sight until the nativity scene. For those, if you guys don't know, a nativity scene is, you see them out in front of churches and buildings, and it's the people, Mary and Joseph and the donkey and the wise men, all standing around in a barn over a little bassinet with the baby Jesus in it. So they're going to do a live nativity scene. No choir boys came forth because they were all in costume, but we could see the shepherds and kings in the door behind Mr. Herkimer. We sang our hearts out on stage and backstage, and Miss Butler kept the pacing peppy, though we never did get the bugs out of once in Royal David City. Then, the tricky part. We in the nativity scene had to creep low under the curtains behind the choir, and here was the stable all set up with cardboard sheep. Remember, Grandma was once a camel. I groped for my stool beside the manger, and above me Milton Grider fell into place as Joseph. We had shepherds behind us and kings opposite. Between, under the star, the heavenly host of so-called angels, with Carleen at center stage. From what I could see of Milton, he was wearing his father's bathrobe and a false beard. The kings were beginning to hold up the frankincense and myrrh. As the choir parted and broke into "O Holy Night," Mr. Herkimer pulled the curtain and the lights went up on us. Mr. Fluke was the electrician. We'd practiced how to sit stone still for up to 5 minutes. When we froze in place, I ought to have been looking in the manger at baby Jesus, but the curtain caught me staring out at the audience, so I had to stay that way. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, sang the choir as I counted the house. The full pews gasped as we came into view, a living picture. And why not? Milton in his bathrobe and false beard, Carleen looking like the actress Sally Rand without her fans, Ina Ray looking like she was about to take off, me in baling wire and 3 sheets showing a Cuban heel. Charlie, don't you wake up now. As I stared unblinking at the far door of the church, it opened. Grandma walked in. It had to be her. She filled the door, and a tall man was with her. I watched her scoot people along a pew and sit, and the pew popped like gunfire beneath her. When the choir went into "What Child Is This?", the star lit up and sent a beam down on Ina Ray's doll. This was to be the high moment, and it was. The minute the beam hit the manger, baby Jesus roared out with a loud wail. Milton moved. A shepherd's crook clattered to the floor. I couldn't hold my pose. I shifted my crowned head to see in the spotlight manger a real live baby as red as a beet. Punching the air with tiny fists. Carleen was upstage and went completely out of character. A wave of wonderment swept the pews. Some people may have thought a living baby had been cast on the part, and if so, whose? But then Ina Ray, flapping her wings, shrieked out, "Ah! Where's my dolly?" Miss Butler fell back, and the choir broke ranks, never to reach we think 3 kings of Orient are. Reverend Lutz, Principal Fluke, and Mr. Herkimer all advanced in the manger like wise men in street clothes, but a newborn in a damp rag for a diaper or swaddling clothes stunned them. Now people stood on the pews trying to see. Suddenly, Grandma was there, heaving up the steps past the pulpit. Her hat was alive with pheasant feathers. She reached into the manger for the red squalling baby. Then she lifted it up, and the light was good. The baby had 1 blue eye and 1 green. Grandma blinked, and she held it up to the audience. "It's all right," she hollered. "It's a burdick." Now you can pause here if it's time to go to social studies, and I'll either finish tomorrow or we can keep going because we're at about the 20-minute mark, which I think fits, but we're almost done. So They talked about that Christmas program for years. In its way, it was the best one they ever had, though Miss Butler never really got over it. Of course, the baby was another reason why Mildred Burdick never had been back after the first day of school in September. Just when the Burdicks managed to sneak an unwanted baby into the manger, we couldn't imagine. And why they thought the whole town wouldn't know another Burdick when they saw one, no one could say. Grandma pointed out that the Burdicks weren't exactly broke out with brains, and the general view was that the United Brethren Orphanage could find the baby a better home. The evening lay in ruins on stable straw at our feet, but there was one more miracle. I looked up at the tall man behind Grandma, and it was my brother Joey. Taller and leaner and handsomer, but Joey, changed and still the same. So now I was looking my Christmas in the face. I hugged the wind out of him and tangled him in my sheets and nicked his chin with my halo. It was Joey, fresh from out west off the evening train. Grandma had sent him the ticket. That's where most of the Fox money went. That's what it was for. I had to turn away quick. There was a lump in my throat. That would mean tears on my face, and I didn't want Joey to see him. And then with a rush of wings, two angels lit up on either side of me. The gawky one was Gertrude Messerschmidt, and the dumpy one was Irene Stemple. Is that your brother, Mary Alice? Wondered Gertrude suddenly, my new best friend. Oh, Mary Alice, honey, he looks just like Tyrone Power, Irene breathed, feathering out. Oh, but taller. Her pudgy small hand found mine in the drapings, and she clung to me. Oh, cute brother, and all of a sudden she's got friends. After we got home that night, Grandma showed me another ticket. It was a round trip to Chicago for me, so I could go on with Joey to have some Christmas with Mother and Dad. It must have cost Grandma her last skin. First, though, we'd keep Christmas right here around the spindly tree in the warm front room. Just the three of us, like the old summer visits, Grandma and Joey and me. But what I remember best about that evening is the three of us walking home from church. I see us still strolling the occasional sidewalks with our arms around Grandma just to keep her from skidding, because she said she was like a hog on ice. And at that moment, every star above us was a Christmas star. All right, that's it. I'll see you clowns tomorrow. Bye.